Hello everyone and welcome to my channel. My name is Crown and today we are going to have some more stories that I hope that you will enjoy. But before we start, it would be so much appreciated if you would subscribe to the channel, like the video if you enjoyed it, and maybe leave a comment down below. These simple clicks would mean a lot to the future of this channel and really reward the effort that I put in every day. And now, without further ado, let's go! First story. Bully landlord gets it in the end. My first husband was not a very nice man. For 6 years I was belittled and basically a baby factory for him. He was a fantastic father, but a horrible husband. After he finally got his heirs, I was then treated even worse until I finally woke up and decided to leave him. This revenge story is not about him, I just had to set the scene. I moved out of the house taking just my clothes, a car, 4K value, no more, and the computer. I had nothing, stayed with a friend for a couple of weeks before I was able to line up a crappy townhouse with roommates. I had no furniture, and my bed was a cat pee smelling free couch I was able to score. I wound up having 3 to 4 jobs, with one of them being full-time. Once a week, I would not even be able to sleep a night between jobs, meaning having to stay up for almost 48 hours. Now fast forward 1 year. My divorce was finalized and I had fulfilled my year's lease for the townhouse. By this time, from all of my hard work, I had furnished the home, my bedroom and my kids' room when they would be with me for visitation. The scumbag landlord was a nice-ish landlord during the time of my tenancy, and I was a good tenant, never being late with my rent, and although I had roommates, I was the sole name on the lease. The landlord would show up often with some guys that he had to work on something like plumbing tests or whatever excuse he could come up with, just so he could be all creepy and hang around trying to converse with me, with mild, inappropriate undertones that made me quite uneasy at times. Finally, the lease was fulfilled, and I was now onto a month-to-month contract to which, at the time, I was ready to move out of this crappy townhouse, and found a great house in the mountains nearby, and I was simply thrilled now that I had got my feet on the ground and can afford a bit better than slum living. My lease stated that I had to give 1 month's notice in order to move out. Unfortunately, I was able to get the house I was to move into for the next months, only 3 weeks away. I sent an email to the landlord stating that I intend on moving out at the end of the month, in 3 weeks, and he can try to find another tenant. But I did state that if he didn't find a tenant, I would still fulfill my legal obligation and pay next month's rent. Within 1 week, 2 weeks before I moved out, he emailed back and stated that was very generous of me to offer, but he was able to find a new tenant for the beginning of next month, and I would be off the hook. He even tipped his hand by stating that he already collected a deposit from them. Now something happened within a couple days after that which was no fault of my own, nor my roommates. The townhouse came with its own appliances, fridge, oven, etc., including a clothes washer and dryer on the main level. My roommate had put a load of laundry in and went to the living room to have a nap. He awoke to find that the washer had malfunctioned with the sensory switch which never stopped the water fill stage, and there was an inch of water in the kitchen and living room. He splashed through the water to turn off the washer and called me to come and help deal with this. I was just getting off work, and I whipped home to assist the damage. It was bad. There was standing water on top of the living room carpet, and a good inch of water in the whole kitchen. I called the landlord and told him the issue, and by the time the landlord showed up, I had already got most of the standing water out with the help of my roommate and friends that showed up with shop vacs. The landlord did not seem too upset, which was surprising for me, and even had an appliance repairman come to look at the washer. The repairman even said, "Yep, here's a culprit," and showed how the dial would stick on the fill stage wouldn't click over to the agitated stage. After replacing the dial and lubricating the whole deal, he left. The next week was chaos. As I was busy trying to pack, the landlord had insurance guys in assessing and workers taking out the carpet and cutting 2 feet worth of the lower drywall of the whole main level. The day of the move, though I was still supposed to be there for a couple more days, the landlord had let himself in as movers were moving out my stuff with a camera, going around taking pictures of everything. I honestly thought that it was for his insurance claims, etc. I actually felt bad for the landlord. I'm too nice. And I told him that I would not ask for any of my deposit back, and he responded in front of the loading crew and my roommate, "Thank you, that's very generous of you." We parted ways and I thought that was it. Clearly I was wrong. 2 weeks into my new home location, the landlord showed up on my doorstep with a summons to appear in arbitration because he was suing me. On what grounds? He stated that it's all in his paperwork and handed me a manila envelope with 18 pages of everything he was charging me with, all including photos. Now I know why he was going around taking pictures. Nickel and diming me on everything from a bent Venetian blind that was like that when I had moved in, and some scuffs on walls, etc, etc. But then he also wanted me to pay his insurance deductible and that following month's rent. He claimed that the tenants that he had lined up backed out at the last minute, claiming that they didn't think the place wouldn't be ready in time with a new drywall and paint and so on. So he still wanted me to pay that month's rent. Really? Screw this. I knew I was more than generous of giving him my whole deposit, and then for him to come back and sue me for thousands. He was not only claiming the damages caused by the flood, but improvements he needed to do that should never be or have been my responsibility in the first place. Even cracks in the living room wall that was from the building settling. How should I be responsible for that? Even new lighting, faucets and so on. All mainly on the accusation that I was negligent. I wasn't going to have that. I know it was a slummy townhouse complex and most of his tenants were on welfare. And maybe he could get away doing this with others, but not me. No way. I had just got out of a marriage that made me feel insignificant and had horrible self-esteem. But now, I had my dignity and felt strong for the first time in a long time. No way was I going to let any more nonsense happen to me without my doing something about it. No way was I going to let any more nonsense happen to me without me doing something about it. I had 10 days before the date of my arbitration meeting. I immediately got to work, first getting a signed deposition from the very repairman that had shown that day, stating that the appliance was quite in need of maintenance work, and the last time he had done any maintenance for him was almost 5 years before. From thoroughly reviewing my rental contract and local laws, the landlord is obligated to have all appliances maintained and serviced every year. I had also talked to some of the other tenants and had heard that this was not the first time the landlord had sued tenants after the fact. I hunted them down and got sworn statements from them also. Unfortunately for them, they did not know what to do and mostly did not show at arbitration, hence the landlord winning by default. No way, I was not going to let him do this to me. I then drew up a rebuttal to each and every claim he had, including photos from the time that I had lived there, printed out all my email correspondence, and even convinced my ex-roommates and one of the movers that heard my interaction with the landlord about him, stating how generous it was of me to letting him keep my whole deposit, which was a significant amount to come. The day of arbitration, I dressed up in my power suit and with my ex-roommate and worker in tow, showed up at the meeting. Now in Canada, arbitration is not held in a courtroom per se, but it is still held at the courthouse in a conference room with a judge. We had 1 hour with this judge, And since the landlord was a plaintiff, he got to go first with his case. He spent over 40 minutes going over everything and I sat quietly until he finished. Once he finished, I then hauled down the rebuttal in multiple copies, handed to the judge, to the landlord and anyone else that wished to have one. And I quickly went over each point. The landlord was irate and interrupted almost every second sentence I spoke. I would pause the moments he would start talking and say sweetly, "I was quiet and polite during your time to present your case. I hope you grant me the same respect." The landlord started to get red in the face, especially when I got to the deposition of the maintenance worker for the appliance. I included with that the Tenancy/Landlord Act sections pertaining to appliance maintenance and stated that this was the only record of maintenance that had occurred. And unless he can come up with more recent records from perhaps another company, it was over 5 years since anything had been looked at. With my defense, I had also then countered that I would like my deposit back and my day's pay from work since I had to take that day off to go to this meeting. The judge then made his statement, and I will always remember this for the rest of my life. He stated that first, he was very impressed by my presentation and that I obviously have a good handle on things and can tell that my nature is of kindness and respect, especially with photos of how I had the townhouse furnished and clean and pride in whatever home I would live in. Bottom line, not only did I win my case, I wound up having that landlord owing over 80% of my deposit back, including interest. The landlord face was priceless. The judge then proceeded to tell the landlord that they will be reviewing again all his previous filings, and if there was enough evidence of harassment, he would be reported to the Board of Landlords and Tenants. I don't really know if anything came out of it. And now I walked away that day feeling on top of the world, completely justified, and he got a taste of his own medicine. But it didn't stop there. Oh no. Knowing that this guy has a history of suing tenants, I printed up my final results with the judge's signature and gave a copy to each and every tenant in that complex. I wanted to warn everyone about his practices and to keep notes, photos, and so on so that he couldn't do that to them. But I didn't stop there. He still now owed me money, and I asked repeatedly for the payment. He never responded. He had until a certain day to pay me back my deposit, and on that day I had gone to his house. I looked up his residence under public records as he's a landlord and had to file under a certain address. And I knocked on his door. He didn't answer, though I knew he was home. I rang the bell a few more times and knocked loudly. He then turned his house alarm on, which at first startled me, but quickly turned to humor since how much of a coward this bully turned out to be. I then yelled out enough that I am not going anywhere. "Get off my property or I will call the police." Okay, no problem. I got off the property, but camped out on the front sidewalk. I had a fold-up chair, a cooler with water and sodas, a few sandwiches, and all my paperwork with me. I was set to stay there forever. I then would tell anyone that would walk by about how I was a tenant, and he wrongfully sued me and that I have a claim against him, and he now owes me money. I let anyone look at the paperwork just to back up my claim. The police did show up. They first went to talk to the landlord, and he was claiming that I was harassing him, slandering him, and wouldn't leave his property. I was on public property, the sidewalk, and it isn't slander if it's true, of which I had all my court-signed paperwork to back me up. I wasn't disturbing the peace. I was simply quietly seated outside his home and just talking to neighbors about his actions. He was out yelling that I needed to leave, and I quietly stated that I would be happy to leave once I'm paid what he was legally obligated to do by that date. I was not going to leave before I got my money in my hand, and I was more than willing to stay there and tell anyone that would listen to me why I was camped out. The police stated I wasn't doing anything wrong, that it's public property and I wasn't disturbing the peace, and it isn't slander if it's true. Finally, after an hour of the landlord yelling on his front lawn at the policeman, and at me of course, did his wife come out with money. She handed the money to the police, of which in turn handed the money to me, and signed off documenting the final payment was complete. I sweetly smiled, thanked the police deeply, and went home. Sometimes nice people finish last, but with patience, they finish with a win. Next story. Do you want to pay a union driver the extra hours at UPS? This happened years ago. I worked at a UPS. It was run by a manager who was very quick in your orientation to let you know he was a former commander in Vietnam, and he ran this office just like he ran his troops in Vietnam. I was brought up to respect the military and did not have any problem when I first heard this. The more time that went on, I felt sorry for the troops if he truly commanded any in Vietnam. It would be dead time in between when trucks needed to be unloaded, and we would commonly just stand around and talk, twiddling our thumbs when we were supposed to be cleaning. He would hide behind closed doors, sweating himself off, looking out small metal holes for hours at a time to try to catch us like this. I couldn't help but just see how pointless this had to be as a manager's time to sit sweating for hours so you can catch employees taking a break in between a truck after really busting themselves. The union covered all workers whether you joined the union or not. I did not join, but I still enjoyed the benefits of the union, which included overtime if you worked more than 4 hours in a day if you are part-time. There will also be rules such as if there was an overnight package delivery that was missed and a driver had to drive it to the airport so the package would not be late, the manager had to pick one of the union employees to get that route. Due to the nature of them being part-time and normally just unloading boxes, it meant that they would be paid at a different driver rate over time, so one trip could get a nice boost to pay from one trip to the airport. This manager didn't like that, and would commonly take these trips himself when he was supposed to let another driver that was union take these trips. Most of our overtime would come from the people who knew how to drive standards, because at that point you will automatically volunteer to stay late after your shift to park these trucks for the next shift. Cue malicious compliance. Anytime the managers told these driving routes, everyone parking the trucks would go to turtle speed, and a job that would normally take 10 to 20 minutes would suddenly take about an hour. So once he was getting back, everyone would be finished up as the trip to the airport and back took about an hour. One time he must have had a side errand or something come up. I never found out why, but instead of 1 hour, the trip took about 3 hours. I just remember 5 or 6 young guys and a couple old guys walking around this lot pretending to look at our paper that showed where our trucks were and looking around dumbfounded as we turned a 10-minute job into a 3-hour one. When he got back and saw us still in the lot, he just started screaming, and everyone's trucks were parked within about 3 minutes. We got the hell out of there. There wasn't much he could do to punish us, since he was breaking the rules and he already did everything he could to make our life there as tough as possible. That was the easiest 3 hours of overtime pay of my life for sure, and my biggest team effort of malicious compliance. And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching and see you next time.